Hey, Modern Samurai viewers, we got a minute while I'm coming back from running some errands. I got a big trip I'm going on this weekend, which I will talk to you about another time. But for the moment, something occurred the other day that I wanted to talk to you about a little bit more. So I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine, and we were, as we often do, talking about life and success, how to work-life balance, and this is just the sort of thing that the people I hang out with talk about. And we were talking about accountability, and most importantly, accountability to yourself, which is a place where a lot of people fall apart. But it's easy to say you have to be accountable to yourself, and we can talk about self-discipline, we can talk about those things, but accountability to self falls apart in a couple of places. One, it falls apart in the planning. You don't make the right choices about what you're going to be accountable about. And then other times it falls apart in discipline. You know what you're supposed to be doing, but you simply don't do it because of whatever reason. And usually most people intend to do the right thing, right? So if they're not doing the right thing, they rationalize it away. Very few people fail their discipline by going, I absolutely should do this today, but screw it. I don't care about my priorities anymore. I'm going to do the opposite because I'm feeling lazy. They very rarely do that. They very often find a way to convince themselves that doing this other thing is the right thing to do at the moment, or that there's a special circumstance, or that you couldn't possibly expect me to do the right thing today. There are clouds, or I saw a bunny, or whatever. And then there's a much sneakier thing, and something the War of Art would talk about is resistance. And there's this idea that you not only convince yourself that you are doing the right things, not rationalizing an excuse to not do the right thing, but I mean actively coming to the conclusion that you are doing the right thing. And that's a slightly different idea. So it's one thing to rationalize not doing the right thing by going, look, I'm going to take today off, but I'll hit it hard tomorrow. It's another thing to actively convince yourself that you're on path and that you're executing, and then you're surprised when it turns out you're not getting the results you wanted. And so we were talking about that, and the phrase is, what gets measured gets managed. That's not the phrase he came up with, that's the phrase I usually use. And it basically just says you want a process of self-evaluation against your goals, and preferably something objective. So let's say you had children and one of your goals was to spend more time with your daughter. So you can just make that a nebulous goal. I'm going to spend more time with my daughter next month. Or you could evaluate the interactions you have with your daughter and set some sort of concrete goal. So you could decide, hey, I'm going to drive her to school 2 days a week, and we're going to do some activity in the evenings. We're going to watch a movie together, we're going to bake cookies, we're going to do a thing, whatever that is. Now, I want to be clear, those measurements are always only proxies, and this is why most people don't bother setting in place an accountability for softer things. It's one thing to set in place an accountability measurement strategy for, I'm going to, at the end of the month, I'm going to have X extra dollars in my bank, or I'm going to contribute X to my 401k. Those hard numbers that are measurable in terms of specific values, those are a little bit easier to form an accountability relationship with. For the soft things, like I'm going to spend more time with my daughter, people get to the part where they try and come up with an accountability metric, and then they instinctively rebel and go, my daughter with my relationship is more nuanced than just, have I driven her to school 2 times this week? And you are correct. The thing is that if you don't have any objective measure, even though we understand that there are approximations, and even though there are proxies, which means they're standing in for more complicated concepts, it's very easy for rationalization to take hold. And the analogy that my friend used, that Joe used, that was so amazing, was he had a father who was a pilot, and he reminded me that Pilots will often say that you can't trust your instruments. Now let's digress for a moment. Why do pilots say they can't trust their instruments? I've done a very little flying myself. When I say very little, I mean very little, like a couple of lessons. I've known pilots, and I've talked to them about this, and I've studied human decision making, so I've read about this. Very loosely, my interpretation of why that phrase has become popular with pilots is simply because they've noticed that, you can be nose down, you can be nose up, your plane can be in a spin, maybe you're very low to the ground, maybe you're very far out of your lane, maybe your airspeed is high or low, and your instincts, the human animal part of you that decides these things, will be very often wrong. So your inner ear, your sense of balance, your sense of that idea that I know when something's straight and level, those things can all go out the window very easily in an airplane. It's a very deceptive process. And so if you're a pilot and you believe that you're flying straight and level and you can't see, maybe there's fog or whatever, but even if you can see, you think you're flying straight and level, but the airplane is telling you you are losing altitude, 99.9999999% of the time you are losing altitude. The airplane is right, the machinery is right, your instinct is wrong. And the question is why? Why is your instinct wrong? It's because we were not built to fly. Man was not meant to fly. The visual cues, the inner ear cues, everything that evolution gave you to figure out what your body is doing and what the world around you says is true, that all goes out the window once you start flying. To be fair, it's amazing that it works at all, that humans can fly without instruments a fair amount of the time, and often they can. It's a tribute to the adaptability of the human mind, the same thing that lets people still figure out how far something is away from them when they lose eyesight in one eye, the same reason why people who lose a sense of touch can do something, the same reason why people who are hearing impaired can have learned how to read lips, and that process becomes almost natural as a way for them to gain language. The human mind will rewire itself to do useful things with crazy inputs, and so it is with the best pilots. Their brain has gone as far as it can go with a fair degree of success towards turning a very unnatural activity for humans into something that they intuitively get a grip on. But that process will never be perfect. So in extremist circumstances, or if you and the instruments disagree, it's almost always you. And that was the perfect analogy. The trick is, most people are living their lives with no instruments, no matter how imperfect they are. This idea, did I take my daughter to school twice this week? Did I spend an evening with her? There might be a perfectly good reason. Maybe your daughter didn't have school this week. Maybe your wife and your daughter had a fight and your wife wanted to take her a couple extra times. Maybe it was a really bad week for your son and he had to go. Maybe your daughter met some new kids at school and she wanted to drive with their parents. They offered to carpool. Maybe whatever. And on any given day, that's fine. But if there's no reason why you shouldn't routinely drive your daughter to work, if your schedule to school, if your schedule allows it, your daughter wants you to do it, and you find that week after week you're not doing it, then you need to take a very hard look at your reasons and make sure they are not rationalizations. You need to figure it out. And if it turns out that that instrument is wrong and that you're not measuring what you need to be measuring because you thought driving your daughter to school was the way you guys were going to connect, but it turns out your relationship with your daughter is amazing and that you don't drive her to school and what you do is pick her up from school or drive her to her dance classes, then change what you're measuring. But don't do that lightly. Don't look up and figure out that you haven't driven your daughter to school in 3 weeks and go, but I'll drive her to dance class, and then forget about it. If there's a mismatch between your carefully and intelligently chosen proxy metrics, which means they're standing in for something else, proxy metrics in your day-to-day reality, then this is a warning sign And you need to take a very hard look at what you're measuring, what you're doing, or whether you're right about your goals. And that's all I'm trying to say. And take that analogy. Your instruments are right. Your instincts are probably wrong. It's not quite as true in your day-to-day life, but the principle is real. For whatever it is you're doing towards whatever goals you're attempting to find, go through the exercise of creating an objective measurement. And then go through the exercise of tracking that measurement. And then go through the exercise of balancing, like a checkbook. Audit it. Am I hitting my numbers? And if you are not, then figure out what's wrong. Maybe, most likely, your actions are wrong and you're rationalizing. But maybe your actions are right and the things you chose to measure are wrong. Or maybe none of that's true. Maybe you're doing the right things and hitting your marks and thus working towards your goals, but it's not making your life any better or making you any happier. Maybe your goals are wrong. So what I want you to do is simply go through that process, because if you don't go through that process, if you don't acquire the data and you don't let the data teach you how to reevaluate and rethink about what you're doing, if the data is not keeping you honest, then the only thing keeping you honest is your feelings. And much like the evolved apes we are, when we're 35,000 feet in the air at night, your instincts are probably not geared for this. If your instincts in these areas were perfect, then maybe you wouldn't be having to work at your success strategies. My instincts aren't perfect, and that's why I use my intellect and my discipline to compensate. My instincts will lead me astray. That's why I think. That's why I evaluate. That's why I plan. Otherwise, I would be one of these people who never had to make a plan and never had to do the right thing. My instincts would just magically point me in the right direction at every second of every day. And you know what? I'm sure there are people like that that exist, but I am not one of them. The brain I have in my head, evaluated to, by all best estimates, live in a tribe of 12 to 25 people in a slightly larger group that numbered in the hundreds. And the most complicated thing it was built to deal with was defending itself against predators, and very occasionally we figured out how to plant stuff. My brain was not intuitively built to write code, manage a company, deal with 5 clients, interact with a peer group that, thanks to social media, is in the hundreds, and my budgeting and my money. I'm smart. I make it work. And my instincts help tell me what makes me happy. But my brain did not evolve to live the life I'm living. And unless you're genetically different than every other human around you in a significant way, your brain wasn't built for this either. So what our brain did do was evolve the ability to learn, the ability to plan, and the ability to use an intellect to supplement instinct. That's why humans function as well as we do. And all I'm telling you is bring your intellect into the process. Do not let your feelings and emotions and intuition be the sole thing that guides your life, when you know for a fact that your intuition and instincts were not the things that evolved to handle the life you're living. That's why we did an intellect. That's why we evolved this huge big piece of our brain that lays over the top of the rest of it. Because instinct is not enough. And instead of attempting to become more and more instinctual and constantly evolve our instincts, in order to be able to move faster, we came up with intellect, which operates fundamentally differently than instinct. I would submit to you that we evolved our intellect to be the instrument. When your instinct and your intellect are at odds, you should seriously start to think about maybe your intellect is right and figure out what's bothering your instinct. But people will tell you to follow your gut, and following your gut is not bad. Your mind has a gut feeling, and then your instincts and your emotions are an entirely different thing. Following your gut is not the same thing as following your emotions. Anyway, what gets measured gets managed, and when in doubt, trust your instruments. Figure out what you want in life. Figure out a way to measure it. Accept that it's going to be imperfect and that you're not always going to hit those numbers, because those numbers are not a perfect representation of what you're trying to do. But go through the exercise anyway, and I promise you, you will find things out about your life that you didn't know. Important things. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll have a lot more to talk about soon. Thanks to my good friend for the amazing analogy. And I hope you guys are having a great day. Take it easy.